65 kilometers of tank movement is all it would take to cut 3 countries off from the rest of the world. That single maneuver would also trigger Article 5 of NATO, the clause that forces 32 nations into war on the same side, whether they are ready or not. This is the most dangerous 65 kilometers on the planet. It has no fence, no wall, no checkpoint marking where the danger begins. It looks like farmland, forest, and a 2-lane highway. But every general who studies Eastern Europe stares at this exact strip of land and sees the fastest possible path to a third world war. Why would 65 kilometers of quiet countryside carry more strategic weight than entire armies? Because of what sits on either side of it. To the west, Kaliningrad, a fragment of Russia sealed off from the Russian mainland since the Soviet collapse in 1991, loaded with missile batteries and air defense systems. To the east, Belarus, a government so tightly bound to Moscow that Russian troops now stage and train on its soil. Between them, a narrow corridor of Polish and Lithuanian territory known as the Suwałki Gap, named for the small Polish town at its center. Cut that corridor, and Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are severed from every other NATO ally by land. No convoy in, no resupply in, no retreat out. Here is the first factor that makes this a genuine trigger point rather than just a scary headline. Geography leaves no alternative route. Only 2 highways and a single rail line connect Poland to the Baltic states, and all of it runs through this corridor. Military planners call this a choke point, the same term used for the Strait of Hormuz or the Bosphorus, a place where controlling a small area controls everything larger around it. In 1904, geographer Halford Mackinder told the Royal Geographical Society in London that whoever commands the right strip of land can command the flow of power across an entire continent. He called it the Heartland Theory, and Eastern European planners have been quietly building their entire defense posture around his logic for more than a century, even when they never say his name out loud. Here is the second factor. This corridor is not just contested ground, it is treaty ground. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are full NATO members, which means an attack on any one of them legally obligates all 32 member states to respond as if they themselves were attacked. That obligation is Article 5, NATO's Collective Defense Clause, written directly into the founding treaty of the alliance in 1949. A strike here would not stay local. It would not stay regional. It would become, almost automatically, a conflict between Russia and the largest military alliance in human history. Since 2015, when former Estonian President Toomas Hendrik Ilves first popularized the term Suwałki Gap in warning about the region, and General Ben Hodges, then commander of United States Army forces in Europe, called it one of the most volatile points on the world map, NATO has stationed a multinational battle group near the Polish town of Orzysz, specifically to reinforce this stretch of land. Here is the third factor, and it is the one most coverage gets wrong. Analysts at Chatham House, the London-based Foreign Policy Institute, argue that the popular invasion scenario, Russian armor punching through from Kaliningrad and Belarus in a coordinated pincer, is actually unlikely to unfold the way headlines describe it. The terrain that makes reinforcement slow for NATO also makes a surprise armored thrust slow for Russia. Forests, lakes, and glacial moraine ridges funnel any large force onto a handful of visible roads. Roads that satellites and drones can track from the moment vehicles begin moving. An invasion here would announce itself hours before it arrived. So if a full tank invasion is unlikely, why does this corridor still sit at the top of every worst-case scenario briefing in Europe? Because the real activity already happening here does not look like war. GPS signals over the Baltic Sea have been jammed without explanation. Undersea cables connecting Finland and Estonia have been severed, once by a ship that dragged its anchor for nearly 100 kilometers before officials intervened. Waves of migrants have been directed toward the Belarusian border at moments that align suspiciously with political tension in Brussels. Analysts call this hybrid warfare. pressure applied just below the threshold that would force NATO to invoke Article 5, precise enough to strain an alliance without ever crossing the line that starts a declared war. This is the counterintuitive core of the whole story. The Suwalki Gap's danger was never really about an invasion. It was about leverage. A single overland corridor lets one government apply pressure on 32 others simultaneously, testing exactly how much strain an alliance can absorb before it fractures or fires the first shot itself. The Cold War had its own version of this same logic. A stretch of German farmland called the Fulda Gap, watched for 4 decades by both sides, crossed by neither. The tanks never came, the tension never left, which is the part of this story that reaches beyond Poland and Lithuania entirely. Most conflicts are not lost the moment the first shot is fired. They are lost gradually, in the accumulation of small pressures nobody was willing to call an attack, until the day the accumulation finally is one. 65 kilometers of tank movement is still all it would take. The only thing standing between that number and a third world war is the hope that no one on either side ever decides to test it. This video is based on verified historical facts, presented in a documentary style. It does not endorse violence or aggression. Please comment thoughtfully, and be mindful of others' comments too. Like and subscribe so you never miss a video. Thank you.